The waiting is always the hardest part. They told us that, but you don't really believe it until you're living it. There we were, crammed into that hangar, a couple hundred of us Fallschirmjäger, all decked out in this god-awful heavy gear that makes you feel more like a pack mule than a soldier. The air was thick, real thick with the smell of sweat and damp wool and leather, and this low hum of nervous chatter that just seemed to bounce off the corrugated iron walls. It was claustrophobic, even in such a big space, because we were all so loaded down, each man in his own little world of fear and anticipation. I kept running my fingers over the creased map of the drop zone, trying to burn the landmarks into my brain one last time with River Bend here. The crossroads there, but it was like fighting a fog. My mind just wouldn't hold on to it. It was like trying to read through a pane of wet glass. All I could really focus on was the pounding in my chest, a drumbeat that seemed to be counting down the seconds. You'd see guys joking around, the dark humor that gets you through. One fellow saying his last wish was a cigarette that didn't taste like straw, another betting he'd land right in some Frenchman's chicken coop. But then you'd catch the eyes of the man next to you in a quiet moment, and you'd see it there too, the same cold knot in the pit of your stomach, and maybe you'd just give a little nod, a silent prayer shared between you. No words needed. We all knew what was coming. It's a strange brotherhood forged in that shared dread. You fall into these rituals like a man condemned. Your hands just keep moving, checking your gear for the 10th, the 20th time. There's a comfort in the tactile feel of it, Running your hands over the harness straps, tugging on the drings, making sure the reserve chute is snug against your chest. You check the action on your MP40, the cold metal familiar under your fingers, the smell of gun oil a small, sane thing in all that madness. It's something to do, something to keep the hands busy so the mind doesn't completely spiral. I saw some of the older guys, the veterans from Holland and Crete. They had this stillness about them. They weren't fidgeting. They just sit there, smoking a cigarette, their eyes 1,000 miles away. You'd watch them trying to find a clue, trying to see how a man is supposed to act when he's about to step into the abyss. But all you saw was a mask, a stoic mask they wore for us youngsters. Behind it, God knows what was going on. Me, I found a quiet corner and pulled out a pencil and a sheet of paper. I had to write a letter home. I told Mutty that everything was fine, that the food was good, that we were well-trained and ready. I lied through my teeth. I wanted to tell her how scared I was, how the fear was a physical thing, a cold stone sitting in my gut. I wanted to tell her that all I could think about was my bed back home, the smell of her cooking, the stupid arguments I used to have with my brother. But you can't write that. You hide the terror. You write the cheerful lies, and you fold the paper up, small and tight, and you tuck it into your tunic pocket, wondering if it will ever be sent, or if it will just be found on you by some stranger after it's all over. Then came the sound. The low, grumbling roar of the Ju-52 engines coughing to life outside. That sound cuts right through you. It's the point of no return. We filed out of the hangar into the cool night air, the wind biting at our faces, and trudged towards these giant, corrugate metal birds lined up on the tarmac. The noise got louder and louder as we approached, until it was this deafening, all-consuming thunder. Climbing up into the fuselage was like climbing into a giant metal drum. The floor vibrated under my boots. We sat on the hard, red canvas seats along the sides, facing each other, our knees practically touching because of all the gear. And then the engines revved higher, and we started to move, lurching and bumping down the runway. The vibration gets into your bones. Conversation was impossible. You had to shout right into a man's ear to be heard, so after a while we just stopped. We were left alone with our thoughts, each man trapped in the roaring silence of his own head. That's a terrible place to be. The plane climbed, and the cold seeped in through the thin metal skin. I could feel the draft on my neck, a chilling breath, and the smells. I'll never forget the smells of that flight. The sharp, acrid tang of high-octane fuel mixed with the sour smell of sweat, and underneath it all, the faint scent of vomit from some poor kid who couldn't hold it together. That's the smell I will forever associate with pure dread. I stared at the red light above the jump door, a single, unblinking eye, and I tried to think of anything else, anything at all, but my mind kept going blank, just filled with that roaring noise and the cold and the smell. Flight felt like it lasted an eternity and no time at all. We were just bundles of nerves hurtling through the blackness. Then, The jump master, a grizzled old sergeant with a face like leather, stood up and started bellowing, his voice cutting through the engine's roar like a saw. "Stand up! Hook up!" The commands were so drilled into us that my body moved on its own, a puppet on strings. I rose, my legs feeling like rubber, and reached up to hook my static line to the cable running the length of the plane. The click of the carabiner was a tiny, insignificant sound swallowed by the noise. That's when the reality of it all hit me. This was it. This was the moment we trained for, the moment we joked about, the moment we dreaded in our darkest nights. We started shuffling towards the open door, a clumsy, heavy dance. The wind whipped through that gaping hole, a brutal, cold force that snatched the breath from your lungs. It wasn't just an opening. It was a void, a black nothingness waiting to swallow you whole. You could see flashes on the horizon, little pinpricks of light that were anti-aircraft guns, and the deeper thump of shells. The plane started to buck and sway, taking evasive action, and you had to brace yourself against the man in front of you. I was near the back of the stick, so I had this long, terrible walk towards that door. I looked at the backs of the men ahead of me, the hunched shoulders, the bulky shapes of their packs and weapons. I saw one guy, Klaus, a kid from my village, turn his head slightly, and our eyes met for just a second. I saw my own fear staring right back at me, raw and naked. There was no mask left. It was just two young men, terrified, about to jump into hell. And then the light switched from red to green. The jump master screamed, "Go!" and the line began to lurch forward. The man in front of me disappeared into the roaring blackness. Then it was my turn. My boots hit the edge of the door, the wind tearing at my clothes. There was no time to think. You just go. You shuffle one more step, and you throw yourself out into the night, into the screaming air, and the world just vanishes around you. The plane is gone, the noise is replaced by a howling wind, and for a few seconds there is nothing but the terrifying, exhilarating, utterly lonely fall. The dispatcher's hand on my shoulder wasn't a suggestion. It was a shove, a brutal push from the only world I knew, the shuddering, roaring metal belly of that Junkers into absolute chaos. 1 second I was crammed next to Schultz, smelling his nervous, sweat mixed with gasoline and cordite, the red light glowing like the devil's own eye, and the next, I was tumbling into a hurricane. The wind grabbed me like a giant, angry fist and just whipped me end over end. The world became a sickening blur of slate-grey sky, green smudges of earth, and the dark shape of the plane already screaming away without us. The roar of the engines vanished in an instant, swapped out for this howling, tearing sound of the air itself, trying to rip me apart. It was so loud it was almost a silence, a deafening nothingness that was just the wind screaming in my ears. And in that whirlwind, my gut was clenched so tight I thought I'd be sick. My whole being was just one desperate, silent scream waiting for the jerk. You count, they tell you, you count to 3 and it should open. But your mind goes blank. It's just pure animal fear. 1,000, 2,000, is my static line hooked? Did that kid, that fumbling kid from Hamburg, check it properly? I saw a shoot fail once in training, a ragdoll spinning down to a red smear on the training field, and that image flashed behind my eyes now, a premonition of my own death. 3,000 and nothing. A cold terror, colder than the air whipping past, shot through me. For thou then it hit. A violent, bone-jarring yank that snapped my head back so hard I saw stars. A wrench that felt like it was going to tear my shoulders right out of their sockets. And it was the most beautiful, blessed pain I'd ever felt. The chaos stopped. The wild tumbling turned into a gentle, sickening sway. The howling wind dropped to a whisper. I was hanging there, under a beautiful, billowing dome of white silk. A canopy. It worked. For about 2 seconds, there was this incredible, eerie quiet. Just the soft rustle of the silk, my own ragged, gasping breaths fogging in the cold air, and the distant, muffled crump of artillery that now seemed to come from another planet. I looked up, tracing the rigging lines to that beautiful, life-giving piece of cloth. It felt like a sanctuary. But that feeling lasted as long as a snowflake on a hot stove. Because then I looked down. And my God, the view. The entire world was laid out beneath me like some god-awful, deadly tapestry. I could see the whole damn island, Crete they called it, though right then it was just a patchwork of olive groves and dusty fields and little white houses that looked like sugar cubes. And it was crawling with fire. Tiny flashes of light from the ground, little puffs of black smoke where our shells were landing, and the trails of our Stukas diving down like angry hornets. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, like watching a battle map come to life, but knowing that in a few minutes I'd be a piece on that map. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a faint zipping sound, like a bee flying past your ear. Then another and another. Then I saw them. Tracers. Lazy, graceful arcs of red and orange light curling up from the ground. From this height, they looked almost beautiful, like fireflies. But then one passed close, close enough that I could hear the deadly crackle of the bullet cutting through the air, and the illusion shattered. Those weren't fireflies. They were bullets, and they were coming for us. That's when the helplessness really set in. You're a sitting duck, a big, slow-moving target dangling under a bright white parachute. There's nowhere to hide. You can't hit the dirt, you can't run for cover. All you can do is hang there and pray the law of averages is on your side, that some other poor bastard in his chute catches the bullet meant for you. You try to make yourself small, pull your knees up, but it's useless. You're just a puppet on a string. I saw a chute to my left, maybe 20 meters away, suddenly crumple. The silk just collapsed, like a flower closing up for the night, and the man underneath, a dark shape, started tumbling down faster and faster, a silent, terrible descent. I didn't know who it was. Could have been Schmidt, always joking about the girls in Paris. Could have been the young kid, the one who barely needed to shave. It didn't matter. He was gone, just like that. And you don't have time to mourn. You're too busy praying you're not next. Your training kicks in, or you try to make it kick in. My hands, clumsy in their thick gloves, fumbled for the toggles. I pulled on the right one, trying to slip away from a concentration of those fiery trails coming from a small stone wall near a farmhouse. The chute responded with a sluggish turn, but the wind was a fickle beast, grabbing me and spinning me sideways. I was pissing myself, literally felt the warm dampness spread in my trousers, but there was no shame in it. Nobody would know, and right then I didn't care. All I could think was, get down, get down, get down. The ground was rushing up at me now, faster than I ever remembered in training. The pretty tapestry became real ground, with rocks and gnarled olive trees and furrows in a field. I could see individual stones, the dark green of the trees, the dusty brown of the earth. I hit the drill, feet together, knees bent, roll on your side. But the ground had other ideas. I came down hard, not in a soft field, but through the branches of a damn olive tree. It was like being beaten with 1,000 brittle clubs. Branches snapped, scraped against my helmet, tore at my smock. Then the final jarring impact as my boots smashed into the hard, rocky soil. The air exploded from my lungs in a whoosh. For a second, I just lay there, stunned, tangled in my lines, the canopy caught in the branches above me like some strange, sad fruit. The silence was gone, replaced by the sharp crack of rifle fire, the heavier thump of a machine gun, shouts in German and something else, Greek probably, and the constant, dull thud of explosions. The air smelled of dust, cordite, and the sweet, resinous smell of broken olive branches. My body screamed at me back, was on fire from the opening shock. My leg felt twisted from the landing. But the training, it was drilled into you so deep it was in your bones. The first thing you do, before you even check if you're wounded, is you get out of the harness. A tangled paratrooper is a dead paratrooper. My fingers, suddenly all thumbs, clawed at the quick-release catches. They were stiff, and for a heart-stopping moment, the main buckle jammed. I panicked, yanking at it, imagining a New Zealand soldier, the ones we were told were tough as nails, finding me helpless, pinned to this tree. Then it gave way with a click, and the weight of the harness fell away. I scrambled, half-crawling, using the tree trunk for cover. My heart was pounding in my ears like a drum. Where was my weapon? The carbine, it was in its container, dropped separately. Stupid, stupid design. All I had was my knife and my Luger. I fumbled the pistol out of its holster, the cold, familiar weight a small comfort. It felt pathetically inadequate. I peered around the gnarled trunk. Dust was everywhere. I could see other chutes darting the landscape, some lying limp on the ground, others still caught in trees. 100 meters away, a figure in grey-green was running in a low crouch. Then he dropped, and I saw the puff of dust where the bullets hit around him. A burst of German machine gun fire answered from my left. The sound was like ripping canvas, a brutal, reassuring sound. That's ours. That's a MG-34. I had to get to it. I had to find my unit. My mind was a jumble of images: Schultz's face before the jump, pale but trying to grin, the red light in the plane, the tracers, the collapsing chute. And underneath it all, a thought so simple it was almost childish. I want to go home. I want to be back in my mother's kitchen, smelling fresh bread, not this hellish mix of smoke and death. But you bury that thought deep. You can't think about home when men are trying to kill you. You think about the next tree, the next ditch, the next rock. You think about finding your buddies. Because alone, you're nothing. Together, you might just have a chance. I took a deep, shuddering breath, gripped my Luger tighter, and prepared to move from the false safety of my tree into the bloody chaos of Crete. That first jump, it wasn't an act of bravery. It was just a minute, maybe less, of the most concentrated terror I've ever known. It strips you down to your most basic self. There's no room for ideology or grand ideas about the fatherland. There's just the wind, the silk, the bullets, and the desperate, primal will to survive another few seconds. And that's a feeling that never, ever leaves you. You carry that minute of freefall with you for the rest of your life. The world just stopped. 1 second there's nothing but the deafening roar of the engine and the cold metal floor vibrating under your boots, the smell of oil and sweat thick in the air. And then suddenly the red light glows and the jumpmaster barks the order and the door slides open to a wall of black night and roaring wind. You're in line, you shuffle forward, the static line clipped with a heavy finality. And then the green light flashes and it's your turn and there's no time to think. You just step out into the nothing. The plane's slipstream grabs you like a giant hand, a violent, spinning yank, and for a heart-stopping moment you're tumbling, the world a dizzying blur of black sky and darker earth. And then the chute cracks open above you with a sound like tearing canvas and everything goes quiet. Eerily quiet. Just the whisper of the wind in the rigging lines and your own breath, ragged and too loud in your ears. You're dangling there, a puppet on a string, and below you there's nothing. No lights, no shapes, just an endless, swallowing darkness. You try to remember the map they showed us, the neat lines and friendly symbols, but it's useless up here. The wind's got you, a cruel, invisible current, and you're drifting away from where you're supposed to be, from where the others should be, and the feeling is one of complete and utter helplessness. You're a leaf in a storm, a single, solitary grain of sand blown into the vast, hostile desert. Then the ground rushes up to meet you, not a gentle arrival but a sudden, jarring impact that knocks the wind out of you and sends a sharp pain shooting up your ankle. You collapse in a heap, the silk of the chute billowing down around you like a shroud. For a second you just lie there, tasting the grit in your mouth, smelling the strange, dry scent of foreign soil. Then the training kicks in. Move, get out of the harness. Your fingers, numb with cold and shaking from the adrenaline, fumble with the buckles, clumsy and stupid. You're cursing under your breath, a steady, desperate stream of it, because every second you're tangled in that bright white silk is a second you're a perfect target. Finally, you're free. You roll away, scrambling on your belly, the cool, rough texture of the ground beneath your hands. You get your rifle up, the cold metal of the barrel a familiar comfort, but your hands are still trembling so badly you can barely work the bolt to chamber a round. The safety clicks off with a soft, definitive snick that sounds like a gunshot in the silence. And that's when you really hear it, the silence. It's heavy, oppressive. Back in the marshalling area, the night was full of sound crickets, thousands of them, a constant, chirping chorus. But here there's nothing. Just the faint rustle of the wind in the chute behind me. And that's the first signal, the one they drilled into us. Listen for the crickets. When they go silent, it means someone else is moving, someone who shouldn't be there. The enemy is near. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. You're alone, completely alone. The map in your head is a useless scrap of paper now. You have no idea where you are, which way to go. All you can do is listen and wait. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, pressed into the dirt, every sense screaming, every shadow a threat. Then I heard it. Not a cricket, but a sound that turned my blood to ice. A metallic click, sharp and precise, maybe 20 meters to my left. The sound of a rifle bolt being chambered. My breath caught in my throat. Friend or foe, in the pitch black there was no way to tell. It could be one of the boys from my stick, just as lost and scared as I was. It could be a Tommy, waiting to pick off a stray Fallschirmjäger. My mouth went dry as dust. I had to risk it. I licked my lips, took a shallow breath, and whispered into the darkness, my voice cracking like a schoolboy S. Blitz! the password for the day. I waited, every muscle tensed for the impact of a bullet. The silence stretched out, an eternity in a few heartbeats. Then a hesitant, equally fearful whisper came back. Krieg. A flood of relief so powerful it left me weak washed over me. Over here, I whispered back, and a dark shape detached itself from the shadows, crawling low to the ground. It was Gerhard, a kid from Hamburg with a face full of freckles that made him look about 16. In the faint starlight, I could see the same wild-eyed terror I felt reflected in his eyes. We didn't shake hands or anything formal like that. We just gripped each other's shoulders for a second, a hard, desperate clutch that said everything we couldn't. We were brothers now, bound together by the sheer, dumb luck of finding each other in this chaos. 2 grains of sand starting to clump together. With 2 of us, the overwhelming sense of isolation eased, just a fraction. But we were still hopelessly lost. We decided to move, to try and find some kind of landmark, or better yet, more of our boys. We moved like ghosts, keeping low, placing each footstep with excruciating care. The night became a game of whispers and shadows. Every few minutes we'd stop, listen for the telltale silence of the crickets, then move again. We almost shot poor Werner when we stumbled upon him trying to bury his chute under some brush. He was so startled he nearly screamed. He was a quiet, older guy, a cabinet maker before the war, and his hands were still shaking. Then we found Schmidt, who'd landed badly and twisted his knee, his face pale and tight with pain. He was leaning on a makeshift crutch, a broken branch he'd found. We were a sorry-looking bunch, a handful of scattered men slowly weaving ourselves into a makeshift unit. That's when we found the corporal. He was propped up against a tree, his face beaded with sweat despite the cool night air. A piece of shrapnel or a stray bullet had caught him in the leg during the descent, a nasty gash that had soaked his trouser leg dark with blood. He was the highest ranking among us, but he was in bad shape. His voice was thin, strained. "We need to get to the rally point," he whispered, pointing a trembling hand in a direction that seemed as good as any. "The farmhouse south of the bridge, that's the order." But looking at him, looking at Schmidt limping along, we all knew the order was a fantasy. We were in no shape for a forced march. The leadership dilemma hung over us unspoken. I was just a Jeffrater, a lowly lance corporal. The others looked to me, to Werner, to anyone who seemed to have a shred of clarity. But there was no clarity, only the shared, grim understanding of our situation. We had to decide what to do with the wounded corporal. Could we move him? Carrying him would slow us to a crawl, make us vulnerable. Leaving him felt like a betrayal, a stain on the soul. We argued in hushed, frantic tones. It was Werner, the cabinet maker, who finally said what we were all thinking. "We can't leave him. We find a place to hide him, we mark it, and we come back when we have more men." It was a gamble, a desperate one. We found a small depression in the ground, a dry creek bed maybe, and we covered him with his parachute and some branches. I gave him my water canteen, my last cigarette. "We'll be back for you, Corporal," I said, and I hoped to God it wasn't a lie. The look in his eyes, a mixture of fear and resignation, is something I've never forgotten. You make decisions in war not based on what's right, but on what might, just might, keep you and your buddies alive for one more hour. It's a terrible calculus. We moved on, a ragged, nervous little group. The night seemed to last forever. We'd hear things, the distant crump of an artillery shell, the stutter of a machine gun far away, and we'd freeze, trying to orient ourselves. We were playing a deadly game of blind man's bluff. The darkness played tricks on you. Bushes became soldiers, stumps became machine gun nests. Your mind, stretched taut with fear, starts seeing things that aren't there. You taste the copper penny of fear in the back of your throat. You smell your own sweat, sour and sharp. You feel the grime of the earth ground into the skin of your hands, under your nails. It's the small, intimate details that stick with you. Gerhard had a photograph of his girl, Liesel, and he'd take it out and look at it in the faint light, tracing her face with a grimy finger. Werner talked about the oak table he was building for his family's kitchen, describing the grain of the wood in loving detail. We didn't talk about the war or the fatherland or glory. We talked about home, about real things. It was the only way to keep the terror at bay. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, the blackness began to soften at the edges. The stars faded, and a grim, grey light seeped into the sky. Dawn. We found a small copse of trees and hunkered down at the edge, looking out as the world revealed itself. And what it revealed was a truth more terrifying than any darkness. The landscape that emerged from the gloom was nothing, absolutely nothing, like the grainy black and white photos they'd shown us in the briefing. There was no familiar river bend, no distinctive hill, no farmhouse with a red roof. Instead, we were looking at a flat, featureless expanse of scrubland, broken by a few low stone walls. In the distance, a church spire stuck up, but it was on the wrong side of where it should have been. The wind had blown us miles off course. We were in the middle of nowhere, deep in enemy territory. The relief of surviving the night evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. In the grey light, we took stock of our little group. There were 6 of us now, including Schmidt, who was looking worse, his face a mask of pain. Our uniforms were torn and dirty from crawling through the dirt. We were low on ammo. I had 2 spare magazines for my MP40 and a couple of stick grenades. The others weren't much better. We were haggard, exhausted, our faces smudged with dirt and fatigue, but we were alive. That was the only victory we had that morning. We were alive. And as the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows, the realization hit me like a physical blow. Surviving the jump, surviving that first terrifying night of confusion and whispers, that was just the beginning. The real trial was starting now. We were behind enemy lines, lost, under strength and hunted. The first grains of sand had landed, and now the hourglass had been turned. The clock was ticking, and all I could think as I stared out at that alien, hostile landscape was that I wanted nothing more in the world than to be back in my mother's kitchen, smelling fresh bread and feeling safe. But that was a world away. This was the only world we had left. This was the war, from the inside of a helmet, from the bottom of a foxhole, from the heart of a young man who just wanted to go home. They told us we were eagles, the pride of the new Germany, flying down from the sky like guards of war. On the training grounds, jumping from those perfect, stable Ju-52, with the wind rushing and the ground a neat green carpet below, you could almost believe it. You felt invincible. But there are no guards on Crete. There's only the sun-baked rock, the dust that gets in your teeth and turns to mud in your throat, and the olive groves where the shadows move. They dropped us into a meat grinder, and that feeling of being an eagle, it died before my boots even hit the ground, shot out of the sky by a New Zealand machine gunner who was just waiting for target practice. The fighting, it's a blur and it's crystal clear, all at once. You remember the big things, the names of the villages we fought for, Hill 107, the airfield, but what sticks with you, what really haunts you, are the small, stupid details. The smell of time crushed under your boots as you crawled forward on your belly. The taste of the iron-hard biscuit from your ration tin, and how you'd have to suck on a pebble just to work up enough spit to swallow it. The way the stitching on the inside of my helmet liner felt against my forehead, a rough, cross-hatched pattern I'd stare at for hours in the foxhole, counting the threads to keep from thinking about the mortars. And the sound, God, the sound. It's not one sound, it's a symphony of hell. The ripping cloth scream of the Stukas, the crump of artillery landing too close, the dry, angry buzz of bullets snapping past your ear, and underneath it all, the moans and the screaming, the cries for mutter that come from your own guys, from kids you shared a cigarette with just an hour before. When the shooting finally stopped, when the last pockets of resistance were cleared out, and the island was officially ours, a different kind of exhaustion set in. It wasn't just the body-deep weariness from days without proper sleep, from muscles screaming from tension and digging and running. This was something else, a hollowness right in the center of your soul. You'd walk across the ground you'd just taken, and it was littered with the evidence of what it cost. And you had to see their faces. That's the part they don't tell you. In the heat of the fight, the enemy is a silhouette, a movement in the bushes, a muzzle flash. But afterwards, when you're clearing the positions, you have to step over them. You see that the New Zealand soldier behind the machine gun had red hair and freckles across his nose. You see that the Greek soldier was just a boy, younger than your little brother, with a cheap, tarnished religious medal clutched in his hand. They weren't silhouettes anymore. They were boys who had mothers, who probably had girls back home waiting for a letter that would never come. And the victory, when the officers announced it, felt like ash in your mouth. Because when they called the roll, the silence after each missing name was louder than any artillery barrage. Schmidt, no answer. Weber, no answer. Bauer, silence. And you'd look around the bivouac and see the empty spaces, the spots where their bedrolls should have been, and the victory parade they talked about felt like a sick joke. We won the ground, but we'd lost ourselves on it. One day, after the fighting had died down, I found myself near a captured position. There was a British soldier, a lieutenant I think, lying where he'd fallen. He was propped up against a stone wall, his helmet off, and he looked peaceful almost, like he was just resting. It was a lie, of course. The front of his uniform was a dark, stiff mess. My sergeant, a hard old bird from the Condor Legion, he saw me looking. "Go on," he grunted. "See if he has any maps, intelligence." But that wasn't why I did it. It wasn't for loot, not really. It was something else, a morbid curiosity, a need to connect the corpse with a person. I knelt down, the gravel crunching under my knees, and I went through his pockets. My hands were shaking, and I felt like a thief, a grave robber. It's a violation, you know. This is the most private space a man has, his pockets. And here I was, rifling through them. I found a soaked map, a few soggy cigarettes, and then in his tunic pocket, a small leather wallet. Inside there was no money, just a photograph. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile holding a toddler on her lap. On the back, in a delicate, feminine hand, it said, "All our love, Margaret and Anne. Come home safe." And just like that, the lieutenant wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a husband, a father. He had a name, a life, a family that was now shattered because of a fight on a godforsaken island he probably couldn't have found on a map 6 months before. I felt a hot wave of guilt wash over me. I was holding this man's most precious thing, the picture he looked at every night before he tried to sleep. I should have left it with him, buried it with him, something. But I didn't. I took it. Not as a trophy, God, no. I think I took it as proof that he was real. That this whole bloody nightmare was real. I also took a small, trivial thing from his kit, a little tin of boot polish. It was almost full. I still have it. I don't know why. It's not valuable. But every time I see it, I don't see a trophy of war. I see that man, his family, and I remember the cost of that little tin of polish. It's a weight I carry. The silence after the storm was almost worse than the storm itself. Your ears ring from the days of noise, and when it stops, the quiet feels unnatural, heavy. Every little sound made me jump. A goat bleating in the distance sounded like a wounded man. The wind rustling through an olive grove was like a squad moving on us. My nerves were shot, stretched wire-tight. I'd try to light a cigarette, and my hands would shake so bad I could barely strike the match. Sleep was impossible. The moment you closed your eyes, you'd see it all again, the faces, the flashes, the friends going down. I tried to do something useful. I tried to write a letter to the family of my buddy Klaus. We jumped together. He was a funny guy, always joking, could make you laugh even when the mud was up to your knees and the rations were gone. He bought it from a sniper on the second day, a clean shot. He didn't even make a sound, just slumped over. I sat there with a piece of paper and a pencil, and I stared at that blank page for what felt like hours. What could I possibly say? "Dear Frau Schmidt, your son Klaus was a good soldier, and he died bravely for the fatherland." It was all lies. He died scared, in the dirt, on a hot rock thousands of miles from home, and there was nothing brave about it. It was stupid and wasteful. I wanted to tell her the truth, that he talked about her cooking all the time, that he had a picture of her he kept in his Bible, that his last words to me were about a girl he hoped to marry back in Hamburg. But you can't write that, so I wrote nothing. The words wouldn't come. They were suffocated by the memory of the silence after his name was called on roll call. The empty spaces in our bivouac were the worst. At night, we'd huddle together, what was left of us, and you could feel the ghosts there with us. You'd expect to hear Klaus's laugh, or see Weber passing around a bottle of captured wine. But it was just quiet. The laughter was gone, replaced by the hollow sound of the wind and the weight of all the things we didn't say. You look at the fresh replacements they started to send in after the battle was secured, kids with clean uniforms and bright eyes, still full of that patriotic fire we all had once. They looked at us, the veterans, with a kind of awe. They saw the Fallschirmjäger smock, the knife, the hard looks on our faces, and they thought we were heroes. I just felt pity for them. I saw my own former innocence in their eyes, that stupid belief in glory and honor. They hadn't learned the real truth yet. The truth that war isn't about flags or ideologies or grand strategies. It's about the man next to you. It's about sharing your last sip of water, covering his back when he's reloading, and trying not to vomit when you see what's left of him after a mortar round. That patriotic fervor that carried me into the war, that got me to volunteer for the paratroopers, it was gone, burned away in the Cretan sun. It was replaced by something much simpler, much more basic, the will to survive. The will to see home again. To feel the rain on your face without wondering if it's going to turn the ground to mud you have to dig in, to sleep in a real bed, to hear a sound that isn't a gunshot or a dying man's rattle. I understood, standing there on that island after the fighting was done, that I had left a part of my humanity on that rock. The boy who had jumped from the plane just a week before was gone. He was as dead as the red-headed New Zealander, as the British lieutenant with the family photo, as Klaus and Weber and all the rest. Something inside me had been carved out and left to rot in the olive groves. You become a different kind of soldier. You do your job, you follow orders, you look out for your kameraden, but the part of you that feels, that believes in things, it goes numb. Or it turns into a dark, bitter thing. We'd make jokes, the blackest humor you can imagine, just to cope. You had to laugh or you go insane. But the laughter never reached your eyes, not after Crete. The ghosts of that island followed us, every one of us. They followed us to Russia, to Africa, to the rest of the war. And they followed us home, too, long after the guns fell silent. They're with me still, every time I close my eyes. The ghosts of Crete. They're the faces of the men we killed, and the faces of the men we lost, and they're all the same in the end. They're just boys who wanted to go home. They taught you everything, and they taught you nothing, all at the same time. You learned how to assemble your chute blindfolded, how to hit the ground and roll, how to sight your rifle on a clean, sunny range. But they never taught you about the socks. Sounds foolish, doesn't it? But let me tell you, after 3 days of cold, wet mud seeping through your boots, a dry, clean pair of socks felt like a gift from heaven itself, more valuable than any medal they could pin on your chest. That was the first unwritten rule you learned. Take care of your feet, because they're the only ones you've got to carry you home. You learn to sleep, but not like you sleep in a bed. You learn to sleep with one eye open, as the old-timers used to say. It wasn't about seeing, it was about hearing. Your ears became your best sentry. You de-bed down in a foxhole, the earth smelling of damp clay and decay, and you drift off to the chorus of the ninth crickets, the rustle of the wind in the trees. But you learned the rhythm of that piece. So when a new sound crept in snap of a twig that was too sharp, the sudden silence of the crickets it would jolt you awake faster than any sergeant's whistle. Your heart would be hammering against your ribs before your eyes were even fully open. And the coffee, oh, the coffee. You haven't tasted real coffee until you've brewed it in your own helmet, over a tiny, smuggled flame behind the berm. It was thick, black, and bitter as sin, and you'd have to pick a few stray grains of gunpowder or bits of lint out of it, but sipping that scalding liquid as the sun came up, sharing a canteen cup with the guy next to you, that was a small comfort that felt like a king's luxury. It was a piece of normalcy, a tiny anchor to a world that wasn't all noise and fear. That's how the economy worked out there, you see. Not with money. Money was useless, just paper. The real currency was comfort. A pack of American cigarettes could get you a bar of Swiss chocolate that would melt on your tongue and remind you of a birthday party from a lifetime ago. A good, solid spoon, worn smooth from use, was worth more than a handful of Reichsmarks because it meant you could eat your thin stew without fumbling. We had this one fellow, Klaus, who had a perfect little enameled spoon he'd lifted from a French farmhouse. We called him the Spoon Baron. He was the richest man in the company. And the watches. Standing guard in the freezing dark, your breath making little clouds in the air, time didn't move by the clock. It moved by stories. You'd stand there with Hans or Dieter, staring out into the blackness, and you'd talk about home. Not about the war or the politics, but about the girl you left behind, the way your mother's apple strudel smelled on a Sunday morning, the dog you had when you were 10. You demeasure the hours in those stories. Sometimes on patrol, you'd learn the most important economy of all, the economy of life. You'd be out there in the mist, moving like a ghost through the ruined landscape, and you'd see a flicker of movement in the distance, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, and you'd freeze, and you'd know they saw you too. There'd be this long, silent moment, just staring into the gloom, your finger tense on the trigger, and then nothing. The shadow would melt away, and you'd turn and melt away too, an unspoken agreement. We see each other, but tonight we choose not to be seen. We avoid the unnecessary bloodshed, because we all knew on both sides that the man over there was just like you. He was cold, he was scared, and he just wanted to see the sun come up. That was the strangest part, the kindness you could find in the middle of all that madness. There were these moments, these fragile, unbelievable truces. The shooting would stop, and from both sides, men would cautiously emerge, not with weapons raised, but with stretchers on their shoulders, to go out into that hellish Naaman's land and bring back the wounded. You'd be helping a buddy whose leg was shattered, your arms aching with his weight, and you'd pass an Englishman doing the same thing with his friend. You'd lock eyes for just a second. No words, just a grim, shared understanding. We are men doing a terrible, necessary thing. One night it was so quiet you could hear the wind, and then we heard it. From the enemy trenches, a soft, sad song being sung. It was a melody I didn't know, but the feeling in it, that was universal. It was homesickness. It was longing. It was the sound of a heart stretched thin across the miles. Some of the boys started to grumble, told them to shut up over there, but I just listened, because I knew that song. It was the same song our own hearts were singing. And when they were done from our side, someone else started humming a different tune, something from the old country. And for a few minutes the war just stopped. It was replaced by something more human. I saw it too, in the eyes of a prisoner we took once. A young kid couldn't have been more than 18, shaking like a leaf, his uniform torn and dirty. I was handed his papers to look at, and he looked up at me, and in his eyes I didn't see an enemy. I saw a boy. Boy who was terrified, who missed his mother, who wanted to be anywhere else but here. And I knew he saw the exact same thing in my eyes. It was just an acknowledgement, a flicker of a look that said, "You and I, we're in the same terrible predicament." Then the moment was gone, and he was marched away, but that look stayed with me. What got you through it all in the end wasn't the training or the ideology. It was what you carried inside, not in your pack, but in here. Tap's chest, the weight of the photographs. I had one of my parents standing stiffly in their Sunday best, and one of my sister laughing. But they weren't just paper in my pocket. They were a weight on my heart, a good weight, a grounding weight. When the world was exploding around you, when the fear was a cold stone in your gut, you'd fumble for that photo, your fingers trembling, and you'd stare at those faces until the world stopped spinning. They were your anchor, and my mother's voice. I could hear it sometimes, clear as day, as if she were right there whispering in my ear. Not anything specific, just the sound of it, the gentle tone she used when I was sick as a child. That voice became a shield against the despair that threatened to swallow you whole. In the deepest, darkest moments, when it felt like there was no point, that voice would remind me that there was still kindness in the world, that there was a home to go back to. And that bred the final, most important thing, a sheer, stubborn determination, a vow. You looked at the empty spot where your buddy had been sitting just an hour ago, and you made a promise to yourself. I will live through this. I will not let his story end here in this mud. I will live long enough to tell the story, to make sure that someone, somewhere, remembers the price that was paid. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being a witness. It was about making sure that all that sacrifice, all that loss, meant something more than just a flag on a map. You never forget the smell of it first. That's what hits you before the plane even levels out. It's a mix of oil, cold metal, sweat, and that faint, sweet sickly smell of fear that comes from 30 men trying not to vomit. Engines are roaring, a deafening thunder that shakes your bones, and you're sitting there on the hard metal bench, your parachute pack digging into your back, your knees pressed against the guy across from you. His face is pale in the dim red light, his eyes wide. We all look like ghosts. You can see your own terror reflected back at you. My hands were sweating inside my gloves, and I kept running through the drill in my head over and over. Check your static line. Hook up. Wait for the green light. Don't hesitate. Jump. But the training field outside Berlin felt a million miles away. This wasn't a practice drop over soft grass. This was the real thing. Below us was Crete, a dark, jagged silhouette against the moonlit sea, and we knew they were waiting for us. The intelligence was bad, we found out later. They knew we were coming. The dispatcher, a big sergeant with a face like granite, started shouting above the engine noise. "Stand up! Hook up!" The words were familiar, but now they sounded like a death sentence. The line of us shuffled toward the open door, a yawning black rectangle with a slipstream that screamed like a banshee. I was somewhere in the middle, lost in a sea of bulky gear and trembling bodies. You hook your static line to the cable with hands that don't feel like your own, a clumsy, fumbling motion. You check the guy in front of you, a ritual of trust, slapping his back to make sure it's secure. He does the same for you. It's a small gesture, but in that moment it feels like the most important thing in the world. You're all in this together, then you see it, the green light. It winks on, a tiny, malevolent emerald eye in the darkness. The dispatcher is screaming, "Go, go, go," and the line starts lurching forward. The man at the door vanishes into the night. Then the next. It's like a nightmare, a terrible conveyor belt feeding you into the abyss. Your heart is pounding so hard you can feel it in your teeth. And then it's your turn. You're at the door. The wind tries to tear you out. The ground is a swirling, indistinct patchwork of black and grey far, far below. For a split second, every fibre of your being screams at you to freeze, to cling to the solid metal of the plane. But you don't. You can't. There's a shove from behind, or maybe it's your own training taking over, and you throw yourself out into the roaring chaos. The world turns upside down. A violent jerk, a sound of ripping canvas, and then a strange, sudden silence. The plane's roar is gone, replaced by the whistle of wind and the creak of the harness. You're swinging under the canopy, a puppet on a string. For a few blessed seconds, there's a bizarre peace. You're floating. You can see the other chutes, little white mushrooms against the dark sky. The stars are incredibly bright. Then the tracers start. Thin, red lines of light, beautiful and deadly, begin stitching their way up from the ground. They don't seem real at first, like fireworks. Then you hear the pop-a-pop of the guns, and you see a chute ahead of you suddenly collapse, the lines going slack, the dark shape beneath it plummeting silently. That's when the fear turns into something else, something cold and sharp and final. You are not a soldier anymore. You are a target, hanging in the sky, completely helpless. You fumble with the risers, trying to steer, trying to avoid the streams of fire, but you're at the mercy of the wind. All you can do is pray and watch the dark earth rush up to meet you. The landing is always a brutal affair. You hit the ground hard, rolling on rocky soil, the breath knocked out of you. You lie there for a second, tangled in your lines, gulping air that tastes of dust and time. The world is suddenly loud against crack of rifles, the stutter of machine guns, men shouting in pain and confusion. You scramble out of your harness, your hands shaking, your training finally kicking in. You find your weapon, your fingers finding the familiar cold metal. That's when you hear the first rule of the front being written, not with ink, but with experience. I found myself in a ditch with two other fellows from my stick. One of them, a kid named Werner, had landed badly and twisted his ankle. He was trying to be brave, but his face was white with pain. The other man, an older guy named Eugen, just looked at him and said, "Can you walk?" Werner nodded, gritting his teeth. Eugen didn't offer sympathy. He just said, "Good, then let's move. Staying here is death." And that was it. That was the first lesson. Sentiment was a luxury we couldn't afford. Survival was a collective effort. We moved out, sticking to the shadows, the sounds of battle drawing us together like a grim magnet. We found a few more of our scattered group huddled behind a low stone wall. We were a sorry-looking bunch, disorganized, scared. But we had our rifles, and we had each other. That first night, we didn't sleep. We took turns on watch, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. My shift was the dead of night. The air was cold, and I was shivering in my thin jump smock. I remember the smell most vivid, lithe, dry, aromatic scent of the Cretan herbs crushed under our boots, mixed with the coppery tang of blood and the acrid smell of cordite. I stared into the darkness until my eyes played tricks on me, seeing movement in every shifting shadow. Every rustle of a leaf was an enemy creeping closer. That's when you learn to listen, to separate the natural sounds of the night from the dangerous ones. You become an animal, all instinct and fear. By the third day, the romance of being an elite paratrooper had been completely stripped away. We were dirty, exhausted, and constantly thirsty. My feet were a mess, wet and blistered from marching in boots that were never meant for this rocky terrain. That's when I discovered the true value of a dry pair of socks. I found a moment to sit down, peel off my soaking, stinking socks, and put on the one clean pair I had rolled up in my pack. The feeling was almost religious. The soft, dry cotton against my raw skin was a comfort so profound it brought a tear to my eye. It was a small piece of control in a world of chaos. That's what you learn to live forth, those tiny moments of humanity, like the coffee. We had a guy in our squad, Felix, who was a genius with a small flame. He'd somehow brew up a thick, strong coffee in his helmet, using a precious handful of grounds he'd hoarded. We'd pass a single canteen cup around, each man taking a sip. It was bitter and gritty, but it was warm. It was a ritual. For those few minutes we weren't soldiers. We were just men sharing a drink, and the war felt 1,000 miles away. That's how the economy of the front worked. I traded my last cigarette, a precious American Lucky Strike, for a small, wrinkled apple from a farmer's boy who watched us with wide, fearful eyes. The apple tasted better than any feast I could imagine. It tasted of life before the war. And the stories, during the long, boring stretches between the moments of terror, we talked. We didn't talk about the war. We talked about our father's trades, about the first car we ever drove, about the dumb things we did as boys. Otto, a big, quiet man from Hamburg, told us about the time he and his brother tried to build a raft to sail across a lake, and it sank immediately. We laughed until our sides hurt. It was a necessary laughter, a defense against the creeping despair. Those stories were our currency, more valuable than any ration. They reminded us of who we were and who we hoped to be again. I saw the kindness, too, the strange, fleeting humanity that persisted even here. We were pushing through a small village, house to house, a nasty business. The air was thick with dust and smoke. We found a wounded British soldier in a shattered kitchen, propped against a stove. He was young, maybe my age, and he was bleeding from a wound in his side. His eyes were glazed with pain and fear. Our medic, a fellow we called Doc, didn't hesitate. He knelt down and started working on him, right there, while the fighting still echoed down the street. He gave him water from his own canteen. The Englishman looked up at him, confused. Doc just said in broken English, "Still, be still." And he worked to stop the bleeding. There was no hatred in that moment. There was just one human being helping another. Later, when we had a moment of quiet, I asked Doc about it. He just shrugged and said, "A wounded man is a wounded man. The uniform doesn't matter." Another time, we were dug in on a ridge, and the British were on the opposite slope. The night was quiet, and then we heard them singing. It was a slow, mournful song, "The White Cliffs of Dover." We listened. No one fired. No one shouted insults. We just listened. And from our side, someone started humming Lily Marlene. It wasn't coordinated. It was just a natural response. Two different songs, two different languages, but the same heartache. For a few minutes, the valley between us wasn't a battlefield. It was a concert hall for sorrow. It was a reminder that the men over there had homes and hearts too. The most profound moment came when we were checking a group of prisoners. They were sitting on the ground, hands on their heads, looking defeated. My job was to make sure they had no hidden weapons. I moved down the line, patting them down quickly. One man, an officer by the look of his uniform, looked up as I approached. He had intelligent eyes, tired and sad. He didn't look away. He held my gaze, and in that look I saw everything. I saw his fear, his resignation, his longing for home. I saw my own reflection. There was no anger, no triumph. It was just a simple, silent acknowledgement. You are a man, and I'm a man, and we have both been caught in this terrible machine. I gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He returned it. Then I moved on. That was all. But it was enough. What did I carry with me through all of it? Not just the gear on my back. I carried the photographs. Not in my pocket, I kept them in a little all-cloth pouch inside my tunic, right over my heart. A picture of my mother and father looking stern and proud, and one of my sister, Ilsa, laughing with her head thrown back. I didn't need to take them out to see them. I could see them perfectly in my mind. On the worst nights, when the shelling was so intense you thought the sky was falling, I would press my hand against my chest and feel the outline of that pouch. It was a touchstone. It connected me to a reality where there was no screaming metal, no smell of death. It was a promise of a future. I carried the sound of my mother's voice. Not any specific words, just the tone of it, the gentle, soothing quality it had when I was sick as a child. In the midst of the chaos, I could close my eyes and hear it, a quiet hum in the back of my mind, a shield against the terror. And I carried a vow. I made this promise to myself after we lost Carl. Carl was a joker, always had a smile and a funny story. He was shot by a sniper on a bright, sunny day. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. It was so quick, so meaningless. I looked at the spot where he fell, and I swore to myself, I will not let this be for nothing. I will live. I will get through this. I will go home, and I will remember. I will remember Carl's laugh. I will remember the taste of coffee from a helmet. I will remember the silent nod from an enemy officer. I will remember the cost, and I will tell the story, not as a hero, but as a witness, because that's what we owed the fallen. We owed them our memory. That determination, that stubborn, fierce will to live and to remember, that was the heaviest thing we carried, and the most essential. It was the only thing that kept you putting one foot in front of the other, moving forward through the madness, clinging to the hope of a dawn beyond the war.